Good evening. I'm Mark Rozelle, and I serve as the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University, and we're very proud to host the Michael V. Hayden Center. And it's really great to see all of you here tonight. Wonderful turnout. And in fact, we have about 700 persons signed up for both the in-person and virtual participation in this program. And for those who are interested, at last count, attendees are from 40 states, the District of Columbia, 21 countries on 6 continents. We're still working on number 7. So if there's a research scientist in the Antarctica who would just sign into the YouTube channel, please, we can complete all 7 continents on one of our programs finally. But again, a warm welcome to those of you online from all around the world. And those of you who are here in person have the added bonus of a very nice reception after this event with panel members and several Schar School scholars. And this time it's going to be outside on the plaza instead of in our multi-purpose room. So we ordered a very warm evening for you, but cold drinks too. The Hayden Center showcases, I think, the very best of what the Schar School does, given its commitment to understanding, amplifying the importance of contemporary public policy issues outside of the usually overheated arena of political debates, to do so in an informative and nonpartisan manner. And I know we continue to have these wonderful turnouts for these programs because there is a hunger for that kind of public policy analysis these days. When the Schar School was founded in 2016, our benefactor, Dwight Schar, expressed his hope for programs such as these that are nonpartisan, non-ideological, all about good government, good public policy, wherever it comes from, regardless of party or ideology. And that's who we are. And with Mr. Schar's commitment to the Hayden Center, this center was founded 8 years ago by the former NSA and CIA director and Schar School professor who is with us here tonight, General Michael Hayden. The Hayden Center has become a prominent voice in explaining and demystifying intelligence and national security issues. If you have missed some of our past programs, I know we have many Hayden Center regulars here tonight. We have them all on the Hayden Center website and on its YouTube channel. So again, thank you for attending. I hope to see you at future events here. And I now welcome to the stage the director of the Hayden Center, Larry Pfeiffer. Larry.
All right, welcome. Thank you all for coming out. Hopefully you get a little air conditioning from that heat wave we're having in mid-April. Just a couple of administrative things. We are going to have time for you to ask your own questions. John, our moderator, will let you know when it's time to start lining up at these 2 microphones, and we'll just kind of alternate back and forth. We would ask that when you come to the microphone to ask your question, that you actually ask a question. Keep the speechifying to a minimum because we're going to have people lining up behind you wanting to ask questions too. So get to the point as quickly as you can, and we can get as many questions in as we can. For those watching us on YouTube, you can use the live chat function to ask your questions, and I'll be monitoring that, and I'll do my best to represent some of your questions as well. For those who are interested in the Hayden Center, the events we put on, if you want to know about them first, go to our webpage, haydencenter.gmu.edu, and you can sign up to get email from us when we are putting out word about our events. Secondly, we're on social media, just about every major social media platform out there, except for Twitter. We bailed on X, but we put announcements about our events there as well. So please feel free to follow us. That would be wonderful. So tonight, there it is. Tonight's discussion is about one of the most contested and consequential national security mysteries of the past decade. American intelligence officers and diplomats have reported sudden, often debilitating symptoms, including intense head pain, disorientation, vertigo, and lasting neurological effects. Many of them have had to retire from their careers before they would have intended to otherwise. And we sadly have actually lost some people to their symptoms over time, and that is just horribly tragic. When we as a nation, when our soldiers and airmen overseas and our intelligence officers overseas suddenly found themselves having to deal with the threat of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, the nation moved heaven and earth to figure out a way to counter those and ended up ultimately saving lots of lives that we might have lost otherwise. In the war we're fighting today in the Middle East, drones have become a significant issue, and there's lots of great anti-drone initiatives underway, lots of money being put into it. You have the President, Secretary of Defense, and others just consumed with trying to make sure we're protecting our people. Well, with these anomalous health incidents, HI, or Havana syndrome as it's often colloquially called, we have officers being taken down. And it appears to me that we're not moving heaven and earth to try to solve this problem and try to figure out what's going on. Central questions around this remain fiercely disputed. Are all the reported incidents the result of a deliberate attack? If so, who's responsible? If they're not, what's causing some of these officers to have these symptoms? At the same time, official U.S. assessments that are still on the books, including those from the ODNI and CIA, have expressed skepticism that a foreign adversary is responsible in most cases. Now, in fairness to the leadership of the intel community at their recent annual threat briefing, all the major players from the intel community agreed that the assessment that was done in 24 and 25 should be revisited given the explosive blockbuster information that has been revealed by investigative journalists like those two we have on stage, or others like Sasha Ingber. I don't know if Sasha's here or not, but she broke a great story about the existence of a device that the U.S. had bought. And then there are others, too many to name. But one of the things we in the intelligence community rely on is the oversight of the press to make sure that they're keeping us honest, keeping us doing our jobs, and so greatly appreciative of the work they're doing there. What makes this issue very important is it raises questions not only about the evidence and the attribution, but also about whether the U.S. government took its own personnel seriously, whether key analytic mistakes were made, and what standard of proof should apply when the health and safety of intelligence officers and our diplomats may be at stake. General Hayden, here, more than one occasion, when people would ask him, what is the most valuable part of the intelligence community? Is it those satellites we put up in orbit? Is it those supercomputers and network computers that we're investing in and buying? And his answer always was, hey, those are great and we need them and keep buying them for us. But the true valuable piece of the intel community and what makes our intelligence community most valuable are the people that ride the elevators every day, the people that go down in dark alleys at night to meet with foreigners willing to give us their secrets. And we just thought here at the Hayden Center that it was important for us, a center established by a former director of CIA, that we allow these individuals our platform to discuss this issue. And we really appreciate you all coming out to hear what they have to say. John Cipher is our moderator, nearly 30 years at CIA, much of that focused on Russia, time overseas, senior leadership roles. He recently joined us as a senior fellow. He co-hosts a couple of podcasts, Mission Implausible, great podcast. Look for it wherever your podcasts are being broadcast. He's also a rotating co-host for a podcast produced by The Steady State. Christo Grozev, who is the second one from my right, award-winning investigative journalist, open source intelligence investigations into state-sponsored malign activity. He's led major international exposés, including identifying the operatives behind the poisonings that took place in Salisbury, England several years ago, and investigating the attempted assassination of Alexei Navalny. Since 2020, he's investigated cases relating to AHI, was among the first to publicly link operatives of Russia's GRU to research into and possible use of directed energy weapons in this context. Serves as the lead investigator, boy, I got loud all of a sudden, served as the lead investigator on the Academy Award-winning documentary Navalny, and he collaborates with leading publications including Der Spiegel and now The Insider. Michael Weiss, I'm going into my foreign language here. Okay. Michael Weiss, award-winning investigative journalist, publishing extensively on Russian intelligence and disinformation. Currently the editor at The Insider, where he has published blockbuster exposés on potential weapons behind AHIs. He's the author of a book on ISIS. He's a frequent commentator on major news networks worldwide, and recently collaborated with 60 Minutes, who I understand we've got a couple 60 Minutes producers in the audience as well, so I'd like to acknowledge the great work 60 Minutes has done on this issue as well. Mark Polymeropoulos, last but not least, 26-year veteran of CIA, senior operations officer specialized in the counterterrorism area, served in many locations in the Middle East and South Asia, and most of which I can't exactly tell you where. Did a lot of really spooky stuff. National security correspondent today for MS Now, the former MSNBC. You can catch him most often early in the morning on shows like Morning Joe. He is also, however, for today's event, he is a victim of an AHI attack, and he's been one of the most prominent voices on this matter. His efforts directly led to congressional and executive branch action to recognize and care for victims. So, welcome, gentlemen. Over to you, John.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. Thanks. Well, I'm very proud to be up here with these gentlemen. The reporting that they've done has been groundbreaking and changed the debate. Mark's courageous willingness to be the vocal leader for this, coming from a secret organization, I also give a lot of credit to him for that. So I'm really proud to be up here with you guys. So I think I'm going to start with you, Christo, if you don't mind. For those of you who haven't followed his reporting, he's done amazing open source reporting with Bellingcat, The Insider, and has used, he's been able to get inside of Russian intelligence databases and sources to uncover a lot of what they've been up to. And frankly, there's only been two times in my life I remember watching a movie that was so horrible, but I found myself laughing out loud. And one of them was his movie Navalny, where he was able to trick a Russian assassin for the FSB into admitting that he poisoned Alexander Navalny. So incredible stuff. So, Crystal, let me start with you. There's been a number of these reported incidents around the world, to include in the US, actually. Which incidents have you been able to correlate most convincingly with Russian movements? And also, can you give us a little bit of sense of how you've uncovered, what you've uncovered from the GRU and other Russian intelligence sources?
One of the arguments that I had heard from members from the analyst department in the agency about why this cannot be real, why this is all a fantasy, was that they could never imagine travel, sufficiently dense travel of Russian operatives to locations where symptoms had been reported. And that was one of the thresholds without proving that that's actually not a thing, that actually there is overlap of travel and incidents. It was difficult to advance this investigation or this series of investigations. So I focused on exactly that. We mapped out with our colleagues from 60 Minutes all of the known incidents. Many of them we may assume to be false positives or psychosomatic, but at least some of them we believed must be real and authentic. And that came to a spreadsheet of about 150. And these are not all the reported incidents. These are the ones that we shortlisted it with a certain degree of caution. And I started going through databases, leaked databases, hacked databases of Russian travel, using only that small subsection of Russian citizens that we can identify as operatives, because of either them using cover identities that we cannot match to real people, or using sequentially numbered passports, which if any of you had read our investigations would know that that's one of the hallmarks of Russian idiocy. They use sequential passports for their spies. So once you have a couple of samples, you can expand them and find other spies, which is what we did after the Skripal investigation. So by using this simple approach, I was able to correlate events and travel to, like if I remember, there were 6 or 7 of these incidents. They were low-hanging fruit. And that included something that preceded Havana, that was the Frankfurt incident in November 2014, where we were able to find members of the clandestine Black Ops unit of the GRU that are tasked, mandated to conduct kinetic operations abroad and to harm people. And we actually had people who had been victims and had been hurt identify at least one of the persons that we had she could actually engage in a conversation with this person and had asked why they're loitering around the house. So that was a strong additional human add-on to the data point. But we were able also to locate people traveling to Georgia with an incident that was in 2019. We're able to, in a more recent investigation we haven't published yet, we were able to co-locate these spies to the Havana events, the original events that gave the name to the Havana syndrome. And in addition, we have overlaps in, Mike, you have to remind me here. We have
Tashkent.
Kyrgyzstan, Tashkent, and at least
Vienna
one
is a big one.
Vienna is one of the biggest one with the biggest number of reported incidents.
Moscow, obviously.
And Moscow, obviously, but that
We're gonna
was
have to
not
co-locate
easily.
the GOU
Yeah,
Moscow,
yeah,
so-
yeah. So at least 6 or 7 very easily co-located. But to me, that was not important in order to get finality on this investigation. It was just an answer to this major challenge. When I was confronted with analysts from the agency who told me, we don't believe this is a thing because we cannot find people who travel to these places. And finding 6 or 7 was enough for us to have a proof of concept. No, all of this argument should be thrown into the dustbin.
Oh, that makes sense. So a counterintelligence look at the thing rather than medical look or what have you. So Mark is a former colleague and close friend. He's told his story many times. I'm sure you've heard it. But if you haven't seen, probably still the best one story is in GQ magazine called The Mystery of the Immaculate Concussion, if you're unfamiliar with this story. So Mark, my question for you is, what has it been like to be the public face of this issue and to have to challenge the institution that you worked for loyally for so many years?
So first and foremost, I just have to say John was my tradecraft instructor down the farm. So this is really weird having him up here, right? I don't know if this is good or bad that we ended up on a stage like this. In general, it's great to see you. I will say you are still to this day my favorite director. So, after 26 years at the agency, the last thing I wanted to do was, in essence, become a whistleblower. When I approached Julia Yaffe, who was writing for GQ at the time, and I told her the entire story, it was terrifying. When it came out, it was pretty extraordinary because I had been fighting the agency to get medical care. I'd come back from Moscow in December 2017, and my life changed dramatically. And so, and they were refusing to just let me go see a doctor. And so, there was the notion of an organization, and for those who know and you understand this, for those who don't, especially in the clandestine services of CIA, this is not a 9-to-5 job. It is your entire life. It becomes your identity. There's a lot probably that's not great about this, but this is not just a normal job. And so it's a place that I believed in and still do, frankly, really deeply. This is America's first line of defense, and I'd been involved in the GWAT and done some really extraordinary things with colleagues braver than me in order to help protect and save American lives. And so when I was jammed up, when I came back from Moscow and the agency wasn't there for me, it's an incredible feeling of betrayal. And there's a moral betrayal to it because people didn't believe me. And so, one of the reasons I was so excited about tonight is, I've told my story and I'm not going to recount everything. Again, as you noted, we have a limited amount of time here, and I've been pretty public about this. But the vindication that many of us feel from the work of 60 Minutes and from you two is extraordinary because it's data. It's not me coming up and saying this happened to me. You actually found data that has moved the needle so far into a direction in which, and particularly after the last 60 Minutes piece, all of my old acquaintances and friends inside, they don't challenge this anymore. So it went from, Krista, when you were confronted by agency analysts telling you nothing's there, to now where this is acknowledged, this happened. There's a vindication there, and it's because, again, it was the idea of moral injury. That a lot of us felt. It's you make a pact with an organization that asks you to do some really interesting things, but you always expect them to have your back, and they didn't for me, and that's always been very troubling. Has caused me a lot of not only physical distress with my symptoms, but also some mental health issues too, because again, it's not a normal job, and I'd put everything into it. But these two gentlemen here and some folks in the audience have just been absolutely extraordinary. And bring this to a point now, and where now the next question, and I think Larry raised it before, what does the current administration do? Because we're at a point now that we're not having a debate on whether this is real or not. It's real, everybody knows it. There's apparently a weapon being tested in the Army research labs. That's from the press, so I'm not revealing anything. And so now the question is, what's next?
You can count on the fact that they'll do the right thing.
Well, the track record has not been great. Yeah.
So we're here largely because of Michael's outstanding reporting on this for 60 Minutes in The Insider. And if you haven't read his article, The Biggest Cover-Up of My Adult Life, Inside the CIA's Attempt to Make Havana Syndrome Disappear, it's well worth reading. It's a lot of inside baseball into CIA, how the CIA operates. But Michael, you reported that the CIA unit, the analytic unit that was set up to investigate this, was structured in a way that discounted much of the key evidence. What most clearly suggested to you that they had a preconceived conclusion before they started?
So we were very lucky in that somebody who worked for the GHIC, as it was known, the analytic unit that was tasked with investigating AHI, retired from CIA in disgust because he had basically alleged that there was a cover-up. He said that from the outset there was this kind of predisposition, there's no there was the phrase that was used. That everybody in the GHIC at the senior level, there are 3 people in particular, 2 of them I think can be named, one of them is still undercover because he's inside at a senior level on the 7th floor. He's in the article under funny names, and I may confuse my funny names because there are so many of them. But basically the idea was these people thought that Havana syndrome was a hoax. There was a combination of thinking that victims such as Mark were grifters or that they had suffered some kind of social contagion. I am frankly shocked. I set out to investigate this thinking that, oh, okay, of course the US government and the intelligence community wants to get to the bottom of it. And of course the US intelligence community would have no problem saying malign Russian actors are going around maiming our officers in the field, because guess what? Malign Russian actors have been doing that for decades. Henry Kissinger famously told the Soviets, knock it off, we know what you're doing in terms of irradiating the US embassy in Moscow. And that was developed, a bunch of people who were coming out of that station were developing all sorts of weird cancers. I was shocked to discover that, in fact, there was a concerted effort, and I don't use the word conspiracy or cover-up lightly. I often feel like sometimes I'm in a Dustin Hoffman 1970s political thriller writing about this stuff, and I set out to debunk my own sort of perspective, right? What if I'm wrong? What if everybody is inventing this, or what if this is, no pun intended, all in their heads, right? What I found was that more often than not, people from the CIA, including some people who are still inside, who were talking to us indirectly, all believed that this was real. And in particular, people from the Directorate of Operations. I have yet to meet somebody who has come from the DO who doesn't fall into one of 3 categories. Number 1, I worked with somebody, I saw them up close when they succumbed to their symptoms. I saw after they'd been hit. This is not manufactured, this is not mass hysteria. These are people with impeccable service records. They had medical records, contemporaneous medical records, diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries. Some of them have occipital neuralgia. They were in high-intensity conflict zones much of their career, and all of a sudden they've developed suicidal ideation. They want to take themselves off the chessboard because they cannot function on a day-to-day basis. Somebody like that, somebody who then says, oh, by the way, I was hit, I'm still serving, or I retired and I didn't want to go public because of the pariah effect that it attached to me if I said that I was suffering from AHI. Or number 3, the third category, my spouse, who's also inside, was hit. I was frankly amazed. I could not find somebody from the DO who said this is a myth, this is a hoax, or as the media has sort of taken up, or had taken up until recently, I should say, this idea that, yeah, sorry, I mean, there's no evidence. This could be HVAC machines on the fritz. It could be crickets. It could be just people inventing, symptoms that simply didn't exist. And I think, I get into this investigation. You mentioned the inside baseball. I think a lot of this had to do with the way the CIA was restructured in, under John Brennan, so-called modernization. Analysts who have never left their desk, who have never served in the field, who have never had to sit across from a GRU officer or an FSB officer, either to cultivate or recruit them or to stare them down. They had an exceptionally high threshold for proof. One of the lines in our piece is that we went to war in Iraq on a Post-it note compared to the overwhelming data and evidence that we have to suggest that A, Havana syndrome is in fact real, B, the technology, the physics behind the device that everyone said could not exist, now we know exists and does exactly the thing that was alleged it could do by people who believed in this from the beginning. And 3, that, this is something that people just, for whatever reason, fear of escalation, not wanting to acknowledge that the Russians have committed acts of war against the United States and what we would have to do to reciprocate against that, have decided we must make this go away. We have to pretend like this isn't happening.
So, Christo, in general, the West has been maddeningly slow at recognizing Russian active measures, hybrid warfare, attacks against Western interests around the world. How does what you picked up to learn about this issue of Anna syndrome AHI consistent with other things that you've uncovered over the years of Russian malign activity, right? So you were involved in uncovering what happened in Salisbury and these other assassination units. There's a new unit that you uncovered. Do the patterns fit with what happened here, with what you've learned in these other examinations?
They did, and I'll start with one additional argument that I heard over the years about why this is not real, because it relates to the answer to your question, which was, if this was happening, then we, the CIA, would know about it, because we have listened to somebody who said in Moscow, oh, we don't know what this is. We have no idea what this is. And this observation, this signal intelligence alone, or maybe human intelligence, sufficed for somebody at the CIA to conclude, if somebody at a relatively high position that we are trusting, or we are not trusting but listening in on, does not know about it, therefore this is not a thing. But that's not how the GRU works. And with all of the ridiculing that we are making of them because of the bumbling idiots in Salisbury who were left traces all over the place and were on security cameras and then went on television, or the sequential passports, there are things that, especially in the GRU, less so in the SVR, but in the GRU, they're doing very properly, and that's compartmentalization and air gapping. And the recent investigation that you just referenced that we did a couple of weeks ago, which is on this very new Russian intelligence unit called Unit 795, where we were able to obtain, and that's ironic because they were supposed to be better than the previous ones in terms of not being hackable or leakable. We obtained their organizational chart and with the full staffing and the description of why this chart is such. And in it, we saw very, very specific air gapping. 29155, the big unit that we actually are making a living on for 10 years, and I forgot the name of it. Sorry about that. Too many names.
In fairness, they've changed.
Yeah, in fairness, they've changed structures. But in it, the numbering is about 120 people there that are actively employed at any given time. And within that unit, there are about 30 subunits of 3 people each, and none of them knows what the other subunit is doing. And that's proper tradecraft, unlike all the other things. So therefore, with this compartmentalization, you have to allow for the possibility that, no, you don't know everything about what they're doing. And to me, the litmus test here was when, after the first publication with 60 Minutes, which was in 24, where we linked these locations and incidents to travel of GRU officers, plus we showed that research had been conducted by this unit into the technology behind this, the pulsed energy weapon. After that publication, for a couple of days, I was afraid to contact one of my sources in Moscow, a retired high-ranking intelligence official who would not be privy to what they're doing today, but would be very familiar with what they are capable or willing to do. And I thought he might be one of the people who would say this is a conspiracy theory. And ultimately I asked him, what do you think about this publication? Well, that was very informative. I said, do you think you're doing this? He said, of course we're doing this. Of course we're doing this. And we're doing this in revenge for what the Americans were doing to us in the 80s and 90s. But why would you doubt that we're doing this? So what I'm saying is, for the Russians, this is not a surprise. And yet, for the CIA, it's a surprise.
Just
this is crazy.
An additional point on this. So what I've been able to kind of ascertain, reading between the lines, is in addition to our collection on the Russians, where they say, oh, what are the Americans talking about? What is Havana syndrome? We have no idea. 2 points. Number one, the compartmentalization. Number two, the Russian penchant for sowing disinformation and knowing that they're being listened to and saying things that, they want us to believe they believe. That's another factor. Another thing that I've heard is that the Special Activity Center at CIA, which would be basically the equivalent of 29155 doing these kinds of things, they said, well, there's no way we could operate in all of these different hemispheres, in all of these kind of area-denied places, and hit 1,500 people. right? Because what happened is, after the first allegations about Havana syndrome came to light, yes, there was an element of social contagion because a lot of people started to report, oh, I think I have Havana syndrome. And some of those cases turned out to be fraudulent or manufactured. There's ringing in my ears. Well, I was listening to my headphones a little too loud. So, okay, well, that accounts for that. But what if you narrowed it down and said, instead of 1,500 or several hundreds, what if it was a couple of dozen people that you could go around the world, particularly in countries where the Soviets and now the Russians have ample resources, and we do not have as many resources? Could you do it then? The answer is, oh yeah, then we could do it. So it's this kind of weird conflation and pollution of evidence. And that's why in our investigations, we focused in on a very small cohort of victims who, again, we looked at the medical records. We know that they were in countries where the Russians have lots of access and resources. I mean, when we reported on one case in Tbilisi, Georgia in 2021, and it was not just any ordinary case. It was somebody who was married to an FBI agent in an area that was known to be the residence of American diplomats. And it was the son of the founding commander of 29155 who was literally outside her car park, and she clocked him. And he's a very tall, blonde-haired guy, which if you've been to Georgia, they're not thick on the ground there. So she memorialized what he looked like. We reported that he was likely in Tbilisi, Georgia, based on his travel patterns. After our investigation, Tbilisi Station ratified our findings, sent it back to Langley, and the response from the GHIC was, well, so what? That doesn't prove anything. I don't know. That seems a little more than circumstantial to me. Well, a positive identification.
Again, it debunks one of the founding arguments of why this is not a thing, that there were not people at the place where these things happened.
Right.
China is another example. There were two sequential years in which reports were logged into the medical centers and the embassy in 2016 and 2017. And exactly during the times of those incidents reported, we find trips of a fake Russian sports entity called the Silkway Rally, which is supposed to be Rally Dakar, but with an Asian-Russian twist. So we find these trucks going all the way to this purported rally to China, and we find within the members of the teams the same two guys who were in Salisbury poisoning, under fake identities, as dressed up as mechanics, car mechanics, right? And there were not just the two of them, there were 5 or 6 of them in 2 consecutive years, traveling to China under fake identities as part of this rally, which can transport anything, obviously. And again, here we have a perfect match of timing. And a big question, if it's not that, what else is it? What would China encourage Russians to conduct on their territory? Is it surveillance or espionage against China? Unlikely. Would the Chinese not know that these spies are coming under fake identities? Because the Chinese, if anything, have better data tech than the Russians? I don't think that's possible. Therefore, it must have been something targeting a mutual enemy. So there's so many examples of why this should not have been discounted at the analytical level.
I think one of the things that your reporting has shown is, yes, the CIA, when this happened, had to go to their workforce and ask people to try to, and so there's people in the CIA who have been in very tough places. There's serious PTSD, there's serious people who've been in Afghanistan around things, and you had to sift through this thing. But I think we're focused on what you call the cornerstone cases, the ones where you can see medical histories, blood samples, possible correlation with Russian intelligence officers. So it looks like there's a small cadre of, I think that's what we're really talking about here. So
the hard evidence, the scientific evidence, biomarkers, proteins in the brain that that bypass the blood-brain barrier, that cannot be manufactured. That's not a symptom of mass hysteria. Right. And we have cases where there are biomarkers detected, and somebody's like, it's like the equivalent of standing in front of an IED blast, except they don't recall being in a war zone. They were in a hotel room, under COVID lockdown conditions in Southeast Asia. And again, these are people who have had exposure to very high conflict, very high intensity combat operation zones, and maybe they have PTSD, but they didn't manufacture symptoms coming out of Afghanistan or Iraq. It happened when they were, going to another station abroad.
So Mark, again back to you. As a former senior CIA officer, what felt most broken about this process to you? Was it the medical response, the analytic process? Has it been about the institution's culture and how they dealt with this afterwards? What bugged you the most about all this?
I think all of the above. There was 3 bins that I always wanted to see kind of taken care of. One is accountability, and that is just there's things I can't talk about. There's Inspector General's reports that were done. I signed NDAs. I can't discuss it, but they're very damning. They're buried in the bowels of Langley somewhere. But it's accountability for people who refused medical care for those of us who all, I mean, again, it's the original kind of question that I always ask is, can I just go to a doctor? Send me to a doctor. They wouldn't even do that. My medical care was delayed for years, and I suffered tremendously. So I would like to see some accountability on that. Now, is that going to be some kind of witch hunt or something? That's not even of interest to me, rather than I'd like to see congressional oversight and the agency admit to the wrongdoing. Because there are people, there's whistleblowers, and again, a lot of it stems from seeing the media report so extensively. There's whistleblowers who have been going in droves to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence with documentary evidence saying this was a cover-up. This is what these people, senior officers, said about me. No, we're not giving Mark health care. That to me is wrong. So I want to see that accountability. The second is health care. If anything you do in life, if someone who works for you comes to you and says, I'm not feeling well, do you shut the door on them? No, you send them to a doctor. That's it. Just allow people to get health care, access to health care. And the last piece is on the attribution piece. And again, that's where 60 Minutes and Michael and Christo come in, is that it's clear to me now with everything that's been out in the media, and again, I haven't had a security clearance for many, many years since I left in 2019, but it's clear to me that there is an overwhelming amount of evidence. And then, when I talk to people still inside, one senior officer who literally had access to everything that the DO collects as well as NSA, said is inconceivable right now how the agency can stick to its analytic line that there's nothing there. And so those are the three things. It's accountability, it's access to medical care, and an attribution. And I don't think that's a lot to ask for, in particular when you see just the overwhelming amount of evidence that's out there now. And what I don't understand, of course, is, well, many things. This has gone through many different administrations. And we can talk about the last administration if you want, if you don't mind just for a second. I mean, Bill Burns, who was my wife's here, our ambassador in Amman, Jordan, many moons ago, becomes CI director, and he promises to take a new look at this, and ends up overseeing this entire analytic unit that ends up betraying all of us. And so I'm deeply disappointed in Bill, who I think very highly of, and Dave Cohen, the deputy director, and I'm happy to name names all day on this stuff. I mean, they have to be held accountable for this. They were in charge. I think that's absolutely critical. But then it comes to the current administration, who, once again, in their confirmation hearings, whether it was Tulsi Gabbard or John Ratcliffe, promised us they would get to the bottom of this. And right now, with everything out there, it is inconceivable to me, two things. Tulsi Gabbard can rescind the ICAs, the old assessments. She hasn't done so. To this day, she got Rick Crawford, the HPSCI chair, a security advisor who I testified in front of, and as did other victims, multiple times. He's intensely interested in this. And why he has been silent on this is something I cannot even fathom. He gave me a hug after a hearing, for goodness sake. And so where's Rubio on this? It should matter. It's Cuba. This is something deeply personal for him. And he also oversees the State Department. So I don't know. It's a mystery to me why Rubio doesn't care more on this.
I don't know how much of a mystery it is, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, Michael, your reporting includes allegations, frankly, that the victims were silenced, discredited, and even surveilled. Since the publication of that article, has anyone come forward to you to either support the claims or refute them with evidence? If I was an analyst inside or had recently left the agency as analyst, and I read your reporting and disagreed with it, I would find a way to get that information to you. So what have you learned since this reporting has come out?
So I want to be careful how I answer that. So the first thing I would say is that there are people still inside the building who, as I said, communicate indirectly. The funniest line I got was from people who were inside at a very high level who said, wow, he really kind of got it right and figured out sort of the who's who and how this sausage got made. The one problem we have is that he didn't go after Burns and Cohen enough, because I was focused on the GHIC. And I said, oh, that's kind of extraordinary. Like the director and deputy director are held in pretty low esteem by people who are serving officers. Number two, I would say that there was an attempt, the only feedback I got directly was from the Public Affairs Office, who said, and this is kind of funny, they're like, well, you say in your article that you contacted CIA for comment. You did not, capital N-O-T, contact us for comment. And I replied, well, this was a collaboration with 60 Minutes. Michael Ray and Oriana Zill were reporting with me, and they have credits in the piece. They contacted you 5 times. You gave them the runaround. You refused to put Ratcliffe, the director, on camera. You told us, go to the ODNI for comment. We did. We quoted the ODNI on the record. And did you not see any of this in our transparent reporting? I can see how if you missed this, you might have also missed AHI all these years.
You wanted to put that out on Twitter, and I told you no.
I didn't put it out on Twitter. I'm not churlish, but I did now say it in front of a live stream audience. But so anyway, no. And then I will say another thing, which is I have checked in with people who are still connected to the building. And the most interesting comment I received, which was only a week ago, was the mood has shifted completely. In fact, the phrase was, even crazy Mark Polymeropoulos is not dismissed so easily anymore. And lovely. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, no, there is a complete and utter resignation that this is real. We were lied to. Our people have been maimed by the Russians, and nobody is accountable for any of this. And I think, look, I just want to, one of the questions we got from the very beginning is why? Why would CIA be so adamant that there is no there there, to use the happy phrase of the GHIC? And the answer, I think, the 3 hypotheses, which I think are compelling, or at least are compelling in the rearview mirror, are, number 1, we can't protect our people in the field. That's a danger for morale and recruitment. I mean, who's going to want to join the clandestine services if, and by the way, I should emphasize, it's not just officers who get hit. Their children have been hit. Their spouses who are not in the service have been hit. Their pets have been hit. These are things that are captured on CCTV footage or on nanny cams that cannot be faked. I don't know how you'd get a toddler to fake symptoms consistent with AHI. Does a toddler have social contagion? Is he reading the New York Times? Number two, if we admit that this is happening and we get to the bottom of it and we find out it's the Russians doing it, that's an act of war against the United States. We have to reciprocate. Russia is a nuclear armed power that threatens to reduce Western cities to radioactive ash on a near hourly basis, minute by minute if you follow Dmitry Medvedev's Twitter account. And number 3, I think there's a sense that we missed the boat on this, right? Like we did not get in real time. We didn't get answers to these questions. We couldn't protect our people. We couldn't deliver justice to people like Mark. Now admitting that we were wrong, and I have to keep in mind here, a lot of people made their careers on the back of finding there is no there there. They failed upwards, to use another term of art in this town, and they're all in the 7th floor. So I think a lot of butt covering has taken place. I mean, and the people who were empowered.
Why? Where is the main problem here? Like you said, one of the things is, see, if you're an analyst and you have to provide proof to the White House because this could be an act of war and they would have to then do something. I can see that as one possible reason. You talked about modernization. There might be friction between the analytic community and the operational overseas community here where the analysts look at the operators differently. There's a variety of reasons why they might have made this call. What's your take on that? Why do you think they've stuck to this, even though it looks to be that I don't want to use the word evidence, the intelligence might be overwhelming here?
Well, I mean, John, you've talked about this. Other people from the DO have talked. I tried to get a lot of people from the DA to talk to me. We had one person on Deep Background who was kind of giving us the brochure answers and alluded to the idea that, well, collection didn't quite add up. We didn't hear the Russians talking about hitting Americans with, directed energy devices, and that contributed a lot. I liken the DA people to sort of the OSINT people. They can stare at a computer screen, they can do, and by the way, Krista does not do OSINT. I want to dismantle this idea. What we're doing is a combination of, let's be very honest, we are reading the Russian mail. That is not OSINT. In fact, that is the opposite of OSINT because it's not open source. It's very closed source. But, OSINT people are inclined to say, if I can't see it on a computer screen, if I can't watch it on YouTube, if I can't geolocate it, it doesn't exist. It mustn't be real. And look, DO people, they deal in human intelligence. They go out into the field. They talk to people.
But if I'm running the DO, that's the clandestine service, the side that has the collectors overseas too, there is a concern here that if this information goes through the system, they're going to say to themselves, oh my God, how am I going to get anybody to go overseas? Right. If they're afraid their kids are going to get hit, their spouses are going to get hit by this, I want this, it might be an instinct, I want this to go away.
Right, so you had a kind of...
Of course, an analyst should overcome that, but...
Yeah, and I think, look, the GHIC was staffed at the senior level, the upper echelon, by analysts, right? So they were the ones that are kind of top to bottom dictating the terms. One of the things we got from our whistleblower was that there was an instruction sent out to all stations, to the DO officers, do not collect on AHI. And our whistleblower likened this to, let's say you're in a police precinct and you're investigating a cop killing. You're telling your detectives on the beat, don't look into this. It's distracting us from doing other police work like parking tickets or whatever. And I don't know, I mean, you guys served inside. You understand sort of the inner culture better than I do. I'm getting it from sources. Perhaps it's bias, but again, everyone I talk to from the Directorate of Operations, to a person, and I'm sure there are some people who don't think it's real. I know some names of people who don't think it's real, but everyone I've ever been able to meet, including those I didn't expect to cop to thinking Havana syndrome was real, have told me, as I said, either I was hit, but I'm keeping my head below the parapet, because if I were to say I'm a victim of AHI, there's a pariah effect. People are going to treat me weird. There are station chiefs that don't want me to serve in the station because it's going to affect morale, and people are going to get paranoid and think that they and their families are going to be targets. So, is there a problem at the DO level about, like, maybe let's, sort of keep this quiet and not raise a fuss? I'm sure that there is, for all professional reasons. I mean,
If I could address this,
Please.
because I've over the years since I started investigating this back in 2020. I've thought a lot about what a possible legitimate reason for putting this under the carpet is, and I found a few. Like, one of them is it's hard to send people into the field, or how to recruit people if they think their heads are going to be messed up with, because people sign up for a job at the agency thinking and accepting the fact that they are likely to be shot in the field, in the arm, but not necessarily that they will be screwed in their head. So that is a legitimate, kind of a somewhat very hypocritical but legitimate reason. Another one is the fear of escalation, the one that you referred to. And the third one is, which I found probably to be the most legitimate, is the fear of proliferation. Once you establish that this is a thing and that this is an actual thing that others can replicate and reproduce, and in fact the cost is not that high, as we find from some of the early information we have about the device.
But to go back to the device thing, I think one of the other hurdles early on was the assumption that this device is either impossible
Exactly.
or it's massive,
Right.
therefore how could you deploy it?
Totally.
But of course, maybe just mention the device for people who haven't followed this, what we found in the last
The device is backpack sized, it's miniaturized. I got into a huge debate on X or Twitter, at the time it was still Twitter, with naysayers who said, no, the principle of Moore's law, which is the law that says that every couple of years technology shrinks in terms of size and capacity increases on a sort of exponential level. This does not apply here because this is about antennas and antennas. But the antennas for this frequency range are tiny to begin with. We're talking about a frequency range of 35 gigahertz. We're talking about this size of antennas. And therefore, everything else is electronics and transistors and being able to modulate and the pulsed energy. And to answer your question, the secret of this device is that it's not that it produces a very high beam of energy. It produces a pulsed beam of energy that is modulated in a way that emulates the brain waves. And it really interferes with the way your brain works to be transported. No, this has been disproven or rebutted by the fact that the government already has a backpack-sized device. But with all of these legitimate or semi-legitimate arguments to keep this under the rug, there's one overriding argument to not do that. And it is the fact that this has been kept under the rug for 10 years has resulted in the biggest intelligence win for the Russian intelligence services, which is the fact that we're having debate here is part of that win. The fact that Mark does not work there, but also he has been, he has caused a rift between the people who believe him and the people who don't believe him. They don't talk to each other. The fact that there's so much distrust within the system of colleagues between the analysts and the operational department, this is the win that they have. So it's not the few cases that did happen, it's all of the other cases that they infected the public discourse and created a disloyalty or more.
Well, there's a pattern there too. We've backed away from lots of Russian attacks, disinformation attacks, political warfare over this. So this fits that pattern.
Exactly.
Let me ask you one sort of an inside baseball one, and then I want to get to the bigger picture just before we for questions. So maybe in like 5 minutes we're gonna have questions. So if people want to start to go to the microphones. Where is the evidence for domestic attacks? So when I watch 60 Minutes, there's a lot of people who say that they were hit by this inside the White House, inside the Pentagon, in Washington, D.C. As a practitioner and collector, given what this weapon might look like now that you got it, I can see easily setting this up and doing this in places overseas where I have some movement. It's hard for me to imagine the Russians can and would do it at the White House. So tell me, what's the best evidence that this is being done in the United States based on what you guys have learned?
I mean, look, I'm going to be very clear. I'm very conservative about AHI. Like I said, the cornerstone cases that I've examined include looking at medical records, looking at the professional reputations, querying other colleagues of people who have been affected, like Mark. I know everybody who has ever worked with him who's attested to his character. He's not a fantasy merchant. All of the cornerstone cases that we have examined, and I've seen medical records of about 6 or 7 victims, all happened overseas. Does that mean that it's not happening on the U.S. homeland? No. Do I have evidence to show that it is? Can I co-locate 29155 operatives here? We haven't been able to do that. But there are other cases that have not been reported. One of them, actually several of them, is Islamabad, Pakistan, where we know 29155 has traveled, and 3 CIA officers were hit in their residence outside the station there at the same time. Which is bizarre because they all showed up to work the next day with the exact same symptoms, having not communicated with one another. So we're still working on piecing this together. And also, we're doing this in the rearview mirror. I mean, when I first met Christo, it was 2018, and I don't think I've ever told you this. The scariest thing you ever told me at that time was, you said, I've looked at all the travel data that I can get my hands on about 29155, where these guys go. And by the way, I want to emphasize, 29155 does not do pure espionage. So the very remit of this organization is itself a massive, massive piece of evidence. When they go somewhere, if they come to your neck of the woods, it's because either they're planning to kill or murder, or kill or blow something, kill somebody or blow something up, or they have just done it, right? They're either doing reconnaissance or they're coming there to figure out the battle damage assessment. So when we find 29155 traveling to parts of the world, we can assume something kinetic is either taken place or is about to take place. When I first met him in Bulgaria 2018, where we interviewed a poisoning victim of 29155 together, he told me, you know, of all the travel patterns I've been able to kind of map out of 29155 operatives, I can only figure out 15% of the time what they've managed to pull off in those different ports of call. So in other words, 85% of the time 29155 has gone somewhere, something has gone boom, somebody has wound up dead, and we just don't know about it yet. You know, I mean, we've been piecing together sabotage operations from 2011 that went completely under the radar. So again, to the point of what could they have pulled off that we simply don't know. You know, another counterclaim that we've gotten is, oh, why only Americans? That's bizarre. Well, first of all, it's not. Canadians have been hit. And we have some evidence to suggest that other foreign nationals have also been hit. So this is the thing, right? I mean, there's a great deal of mystery and occlusion as to what this unit has done. A lot of the work that we're doing is historical in nature. Because I think, you know, we've burnt 29155. They cannot travel anymore. That's why they're setting up these parallel or competitive organizations like Center 795. So again, we could spend the next 20 years figuring out stuff that has happened in the last 15.
So my last question to you guys, I'll start with Mark here, but it's for all of you essentially. Mark, what would a morally serious response from the CIA leadership look like to you now? And what do you guys think Congress or the administration should demand now? Should it be a new intelligence assessment? Mm-hmm. Should it be an outside scientific review? Should it be a counterintelligence red team? What's the right thing to do now for the administration and the CIA? So,
I mean, the playbook is right there. There is a report on Tulsi Gabbard's desk, which is stuck there. This has been reported in the press, but it calls for the rescinding of the assessment, the ICA. That's the right thing to do. That's a very small step, but basically it says we're going to take back the old assessments, which basically said it was very unlikely it was a foreign adversary. That seems to me to be the most obvious thing, just based on the preponderance of evidence. Also on her desk is a report that deals with accountability, and that's where it gets a little more complicated, because I think the DNI wants to see accountability, and the CIA does not. And our understanding, and it's from plenty of reporting you all have done, and we've all talked about, is that that Ratcliffe is blocking this. But at the very minimum, they have to rescind the ICA, and they have to acknowledge what was done to us. And what was done to us was denying us health care, the gaslighting. John, you mentioned the spying. I mean, I talked about it on 60 Minutes, talked about it with with Michael Weiss. Ultimately, they were the CIA was trying to actually infiltrate our victims' chats, a support group. That's insane. Mark Zaid, my lawyer, who people here know very well, basically said, and I think Jim Petrella is here as well, former agency lawyer. That's the agency spying on Americans. It's not the CIA going to the FBI saying we're worried. It's actually they tried to infiltrate our chats. That's crazy, and that infuriates me. All these things have to be investigated and have to come out, and that's where the role of congressional oversight too. So for me, it's very simple. Rescind the ICA. That's the first step. And an acknowledgement. Again, let me just say, I'm sorry, one quick thing on this.
No, take time.
And I've talked about it before in the press, but it's really important for people here and whoever is watching to know. In November of 2024, just before the election, or just before the change in administrations, I was called down to the National Security Council for a 4-hour meeting in the sit room. There was 6 of us victims, and it was senior members of the NSC, including Maher Bitar, who I said very clearly I would talk about his role in this. He had been elevated, I believe, to the number 3 at the NSC at the time, and basically they said, "We believe you." And I didn't have a security clearance, and I didn't ask, but he said, "We believe you 100%. This happened to you." And they also acknowledged it was a CIA cover-up. And as it turns out, later reporting, where's Sasha? Is she here? And then CNN talks about that time, amazingly enough, is when the CIA or the U.S. government acquired the device, which is a GRU weapon, which is now being tested. So it makes some sense. But the Biden NSC at least could come to us and say, "Hey, we're sorry," and they apologize.
But they didn't do it publicly.
They didn't do it publicly.
Okay. Unless you guys have something you want to add to that, I'll start letting the people question if you want. So let's start over here, sir.
Hello.
Can you just state your name or your affiliation if you want to, and then quick question.
Yes, sir. First, my name is Jaden. I graduated from Mason in like 3 weeks, so I'm excited for that.
Congratulations.
Yes, sir. Thank you. But I just want to say thank you, all of you, for being here. Your courage for reporting on this issue, and also, Mr. Mark, your courage for sharing your story. Me personally, I'm interested in a career with the CIA as I'm about to graduate, and so hearing about the Havana syndrome.
Sorry about that.
But hearing about the Havana syndrome, obviously that's very concerning, and being denied medical care. So what kind of advice would you provide for future recruits or people that are interested in going into the CIA? Should we still be having that dream, or what advice would you give?
Look, I mean, it was the greatest job I could ever hope for. It was an extraordinary time with the global war on terrorism. The feelings that we were standing on the ramparts protecting America. I will never forget that I served as a base chief in Afghanistan, one of our paramilitary bases. I've done some really incredible operations that General Hayden approved, thankfully. And some of the proudest moments of my life. But I will say that this incident shook me to the point where I probably give 50 to 70 lectures at colleges all around the country. And when students ask me about joining, I have a hard time now until this gets resolved. As great as the job is, but if the agency's mission is going to be, if they say, or their slogan is, mission first, people always, they got that second part wrong. They've got to get that right. And so that's, and it pains me to say that because, I want to pass the torch to the next generation. But they got to get this part right first. So keep going, maybe have some faith. Let's see what happens here. But I don't want to dissuade anyone from going, but again, this is a really, really dark mark on the agency. And as Michael's reporting, I think it was a quote from a very senior agency officer, a legend in our place, saying this is kind of the worst scandal in the history of the organization. I think that's accurate.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Can I go over here? Yes, sir.
Eric Hazeltine. I'm the former associate DNI and author of The Spy in Moscow Station, where we talk a lot about microwave attacks. You mentioned revenge for the 80s and 90s. Has anybody laid out a timeline of bilateral relations and events between the U.S. and Russia and looked at potential correlations between the timing and location and the personnel involved to see any deeper as to the why?
Can I?
Yeah, please do.
I'm glad you asked that question. So when we did our first investigation with 60, 2.5 years ago, one of the things that I noticed as a pattern was people who were hit in the Cornerstone cases I referred to, guess where they had served in CIA only a few years prior? Kyiv. And they served in Kyiv from about 2015 onward. And if you read the superb reporting that Adam Entus has done in the New York Times about how CIA put in the plumbing, as it were, built basically the Ukrainian services from the ground up, allowed or taught the Ukrainian military intelligence service how to do things like assassinate Russians inside Russia and do deep strikes and all the rest of it. All of those officers or their spouses got sent elsewhere, and they got hit, including in Vienna, including in other places. And when I kind of alluded to this, I think I called it the ghosts of Kyiv Station in the piece. I got a call from somebody who had served in Kyiv Station, who himself wasn't hit, although as he put it, he's a former Marine, so he might have had brain damage and not even realized it. And he said, if anything, you undershot the mark because more people from there were hit. So my hypothesis, again, this is just a hypothesis, is that the Russians were anticipating a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They wanted to countermand the Ukrainians' ability to resist and to push back. They understood who the pieces on the chessboard were that had to be taken out in the event of a full-scale war, and that's what they did. And, you know, Director Burns went to Moscow in 2021, and he told Putin, we know what you're doing, knock it off. And for a time, there were underreported cases of AHI, credible reported cases. Why? Because the Russians obviously had bigger fish to fry. They decided to invade their next-door neighbor. So I believe that the correlation is that. They knew who was who in the agency who was working this file and who would be their greatest adversaries if they decided to engage in a full-scale invasion, and they wanted them taken out.
And just to add to that, your point is a good one because the Russians have been doing things that have hurt the health of American diplomats and intelligence officers for years and years. I've been spy dusted, for example, which is a carcinogenic thing that they use for counterintelligence purposes. And so I think there is a pattern over time. There's a lot of people who served in Moscow who are convinced that cancers that they received and things are based on some of the weapons that were used against them at the time. So I do think this fits a larger pattern, which I think is true. So Sasha, to you.
Okay, hey guys. My name's Sasha Ingber. I'm an independent journalist. I have a Substack called Humant. I also host the International Spy Museum's podcast, Spycast, for which Michael was our our guest this week. Our episode came out yesterday. In the episode, Michael talked about how he had this hypothesis that this could have started in preparation of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. When you alluded just a few minutes before the Q&A started to the question that you get, why isn't this not happening in other parts of the world? I wanted to ask you specifically about the UK, because when we think about Ukraine, when the United States paused intelligence with Ukraine, who did they turn to? They turned to MI6. They're very close with the Brits. This is a relationship that also goes back years. The Russians know that, yet at least in some of the reporting that I've done, I've been contacted since then by one former senior British official who described how there wasn't really anything that happened on their side, at least to this person's knowledge. I wanted to get your thoughts and hear from you about if you're pursuing this, maybe that I'm sure there's a lot more there. I haven't been looking into it myself, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts, and also great to see you, and I'm lucky to have had the privilege of interviewing all of you.
Well, one quick thing on this. There is, one of the Cornerstone cases, one of the officers who is still suffering developed a rare cancer that happened in the UK. So it was a senior CI officer working on Russia who was hit pretty severely there. And there's actually another case. There's two now.
But I think Sasha's question refers to UK
I know,
intelligence officers.
but I'm just saying. But it did happen on UK soil, and the Brits do know this. But yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The only explanation, and this is a very valid question, because currently, at least since the current administration here, the UK is a much bigger source of assistance to Ukraine than the United States is, and the Russians are aware of that. So that is a valid question, at least contemporaneously, at least today, not necessarily the case 10 years ago when this would have started. But we have to keep in mind one thing, that back in the, Mark, you might help me, or maybe you have the exact year, but there was this entity that was created in the KGB, which is currently the heir of that entity is today's military counterintelligence, a subdivision of military counterintelligence. It's within the FSB. And its main founding goal at the time, mandate, was to harass the CIA. Not to harass all the Western, but to harass the main adversary's intelligence service. And that culture, that heritage, that legacy has remained until today. And this military counterintelligence unit is working in conjunction. It's the political commissary of Unit 29155. So I can imagine that might be the ideological reason for targeting only Americans.
I can wonder, it might be harder to operate there after the Salisbury attack too. I don't know, just wondering about that. So.
Well, it's funny because just another point. I mean, people from CIA have told me the Brits are the ones that are asking, why aren't you guys coming out and saying Havana syndrome is real and the Russians are doing it? We all know that it's true. And Mark alluded to hits that have happened in the UK. I remember interviewing Oleg Kalugin 10, 20 years ago, famous KGB, not a defector, but somebody who retired and then kind of told all. And I said to him, what is the difference between the United States, the main adversary, and Europe, including the UK? Remember the umbrella poisoning of Markov on the River Thames? He said, Europe is just our playground. We can do whatever we want there. But in America, there are rules, and we don't. This is to your point about attacks on the homeland. Now, those rules get changed and revised all the time. So it's not to say that these things haven't shifted, but I do think that this is also compartmentalized in terms of how they want to deal with Americans versus how they would want to deal with Europeans. I mean, the Ukrainians ask us all the time, well, how come, they're not zapping us with directed energy? I mean, because they're fucking killing you, that's why. They don't need to. There's plausible deniability with, hitting CIA officers with something with no forensic, trace, no ballistics that they can, attribute to the Russians.
They have better weapons.
They have better weapons.
One quick thing just about the domestic attacks. I just want to throw this out there because I have met a lot of CIA officers and others who have been, they believe they've been subject to this, and their symptoms are the same as ours. And so we just have to kind of keep that in mind, also with the notion of everything we couldn't explain a lot of what was going on. And the key piece, the last piece of this, and again, it's been out in press reporting. I mean, the Russians, via the Spetsnaz, their alpha teams, have been running around the United States forever, chasing defectors. And so we know that, and we lose them all the time. And so again, that's been out in open source reporting. So I don't find it implausible at all that it's happening in the U.S. in particular because Putin has changed the rules of the game. In the past, perhaps he wouldn't have tried things in the U.S. But we've had teams of Russian special operations officers running around looking for their defectors. So it would not be a huge...
The FBI better get their game together then.
Well, they're
true.
doing ice.
Sir.
Yes, good evening. Thank you to all of you for the efforts that you're making on this important issue. My name is John Dinkelman. I'm the president of the American Foreign Service Association. Nominally, I'm still with state. I'd like to turn your attention down to Foggy Bottom for a moment to get an idea of complacency versus complicity in regards to who was in the driver's seat vis-a-vis the agency or state and the Office of Medical Advisor and the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and your thoughts as to whether or not they just sat in the back and let Langley drive this, or whether they proactively did anything to either contribute or detract from the efforts. And parallel with that, with the recent discontinuation of collective bargaining in foreign affairs elements of the federal government, we have very little ability to even lobby or shake our fists at anyone with any credibility. Where do you believe that the efforts of an organization such as mine can best be focused to assist not just my members, but all of these individuals who have been adversely affected? Thank you.
Great question.
I think what's critical on this is, of course, there's been State Department personnel. A lot of us focus in the intelligence community, but there's been State Department personnel and U.S. military personnel as well who have been affected by this. No doubt. I know this because I go to Walter Reed. I'm still treated there, and I see them. I think the State Department took a backseat to the agency on this. There's no doubt about that. I think there also is collusion between the two medical offices. Again, we know that from whistleblowers coming forward and from testimony that I've even been down at the Congressional Oversight. And so a couple things on that. One is I think it's a black mark on the department as well. But what I'm going to go back to it time and again. You have Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State. Marco Rubio is the vice chair of CISI, who we testified in front of. Myself and uses a pseudonym Adam. He was patient zero from Havana, and several other officers. We worked with Rubio's staff to, helping on congressional legislation on the Havana Act. Rubio is as well versed on this as anyone in U.S. politics, and so it was one of the things I was hoping that he would tackle, and he's not done so. And so the question is why. I don't know if you have access to him. It's very hard. He's obviously busy right now. But the answer and the kind of final part in this, it's the media. I mean, there's so much, and when I see Sasha or I see Mike from 60 Minutes or these guys here, the only way this has gotten pushed forward in any fashion is through the media. And I've used that, and I've tried to use it effectively because there's no all other means weren't working. Certainly my contact with my old organization or even with congressional oversight. So, my suggestion to you is to use the media and this. And again, you have a Secretary of State who, I mean, think about what you could say right now as we are going to turn to Cuba, and I think everyone knows that. Well, if we turn to Cuba, we're going to get some answers on Havana syndrome. And if Marco Rubio is actually having negotiations with the Cuban government, why is that not part of the whole piece too? And again, going back to the notion of protecting your people, which is part of your remit.
Unless you guys have something specific, I'll go.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Oswaldo Silva. I'm a graduate student in the International Security Program. Is this the most pressing phenomenon in asymmetric clandestine operations, or have you identified others that we should also pay attention to?
Sorry, the adjective used, is it the most?
Like the most pressing phenomenon?
Well, I think from the point of view of how it is chalked off at the Kremlin, this is the most successful operation that they've had, just because of the knock-on effect that we've discussed here, the way it became sort of a bone of contention and a bone of moral injury and so on and so forth. I don't think they planned it this way, but it became one. And what the Kremlin are good at is they adjust their strategy based on empirical results. They work on a market principle. So this was a startup and it worked. And they're going to over-invest in this startup from now on. So from that perspective, I think it is something that should be taken into account just because of the intended attention that they will focus on this on. But there are other things that are still in the pipeline that they will try and they may take this over, such as use of AI and so on and so forth.
I would add to this, one of the arresting phrases that's in our second investigation is, it tore the building apart, right? So the Russians are very good at doing, and I don't say this to diminish the impact it's had on the victims, but let's assume that there's a few dozen cases that are real, that 29155 went around hitting people, instead of thousands of cases. Let's call that, in the annals of active measures or kinetic operations by the Russians, a solid B+ effort, right? They haven't killed anybody, but they've neutralized a lot of Americans. It's actually turned into an A++ effort based on how the U.S. government has responded to it. So it's torn the building apart. The director of operations now hates the director of analysis. People in the DO either keep their heads down, don't want to raise a fuss about their own victimhood, or if they are victims inside the building, they have been sort of earmarked for professional stasis because nobody wants to work with them for the fear it's going to have on morale. I mean, this reminded me, when I was writing the investigation, of basically what Angleton did to the building, right? He was close friends with Kim Philby, and the Russians, the Soviets, colonized his mind, and he tore the building apart in his paranoia and his mole hunt, right? Same thing has happened here. Mark refers to the moral injury. I expect the Russians to do this. Right? That doesn't surprise me. There's nothing you could tell me the Russians are doing that would surprise me. And we have seen some perverse shit, and we are working on even more perverse shit at the moment. I do expect my own government to protect the people who guard us while we sleep, the officers and the soldiers who are out in the front lines making our country safer. And when they not only don't protect them, but they say you're a bunch of frauds and grifters. I mean, look, I'm pissed off now. Mike Morell was contracted at CBS. When 60 Minutes started to do their investigation, he shouted down the phone to two of the producers saying, "Why are you barking up this tree? These people are all frauds. They're looking to cash in. They're looking for," I mean, People who leave CIA go into the private sector and they make a lot of money, a lot more than they ever made in government service. Yeah. People who cannot function well because they have been afflicted by AHI, who have been medically retired from CIA, and in some cases, like Adam, patient zero, have to walk around with a weighted vest because the vertigo is so severe they would tip over, or they're medically blind in one eye. Or as I said before, they have occipital neuralgia. They want to kill themselves because the pain is so severe and the rehabilitation is so fraught. I'm sorry, these are not grifters and fantasy merchants and fraudsters. And how dare anybody who calls themselves a director or acting director or anybody on the 7th floor treat your cadres like this? I mean, to the question that came earlier, should I go work for the CIA? I wouldn't, knowing what I know now. And again, I didn't start out in national security reporting, looking to dismantle the deep state or anything. I'm not. I like my country. I consider myself a patriot, and I like people like Mark and John. But what I've uncovered, what I've heard, it chills me to the bone. It scares me more than what the Russians are doing, truth be told.
Let's hope we learn more that makes it not as bad at that, but it does sound bad. So, sir.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. My name is Matthew Warner. I'm a longtime federal government employee. I'm here in my personal capacity. I have to make sure that I say that. Here's my question. And you brought up accountability, and I thought that was very important, Mark.
Yep.
And my question comes from the Inspector General and the General Accountability Office perspective. Outside of fully investigating hotline complaints, what can IGs do and General Accountability Office employees, what can they do to provide more active oversight in this area? What suggestions do you have for these oversight organizations? Thank you.
So, I mean, the IG plays an incredibly useful role. I mean, I was in the Director of Operations for a long time. We had IG inspections on everything we did. Most of my career was in covert action, and so we were, inspected out the wazoo, which is right. I'm good with that. And that has to do with just making sure that in this little secret world, government works successfully. But when it comes to something like this, which was something on a much bigger scale about taking care of its people, the IG report that I'm referring to, again, I can't talk about it, but it doesn't do any good if it's a really good report, and it was, and it's sitting in the bowels somewhere of Langley. It's got to come out. It's got to be declassified. For the basic reason that it has to show the workforce that when things go wrong, and they do, and you know that, there are actions that are taken to rectify the situation and people are held accountable. Simple as that. And so we live in this secret world, of course, but I think there's times where there should be more transparency on something like this. Mark Zaid, my lawyer, and myself, we've called for this IG report to be released. It never will, of course. But I think in an ideal world, it would be, because it would prove to the employees that, yep, made a mistake, took some measures so that it never happens again, and this is what we're doing. That to me would be the right move, but I'm not holding my breath.
Sir, and get through these questions.
First, I want to say thank you to the university for sponsoring this program. My name is Richard Lighthouse. I'm with an organization called TargetedJustice.com. We have thousands of members, civilians, that have been affected with Havana syndrome. They are civilians. My question for the panel is, are you familiar with a directed energy weapon called the Reltron? It's made right here in America in San Leandro, California, by Physica Applied Technologies. This is the weapon that causes Havana syndrome. Look it up, Reltron. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
No, thanks for that. We will look it up. And these weapons are going to be more and more used as AI comes in and other things. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Gilbert. I'm a physician, and I've written on the syndrome also. And I've interviewed with my husband, Eric Hasseltine, several of the victims. I've also been at the medical conferences of neurologists and ENT specialists. And what's interesting when you talk, Michael, about the 24 cases, those have one particular thing in common, is that they have the inner ear. That seems like there is the inner ear damage that prevents them from having balance. So that was interesting what they were saying. So just wanted to say that. But my question is different. Question is, what has happened in the last 12 months? Is this increasing, decreasing? What's going on? What has been going on more recently?
I mean, we have some reporting that indicates or that there are allegations that there are attacks that are continuing. Again, I stick to what I have examined thoroughly myself. I can't vouch for things that I haven't looked at. You know, the idea that the Russians called it off, one reason could be if they called it off temporarily, again, coming back to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they simply have bigger fish to fry. And also, keep in mind, because of that invasion, their ability to travel overseas has been severely limited. You know, one of the things that we've been reporting at The Insider is 29155, instead of sending their operatives into the field to blow things up or to kill people, are now recruiting saboteurs online, much the same way Al-Qaeda or ISIS used to do in the 2015 period. And in many cases, these are riffraff, these are kind of on-the-shelf organized crime figures, or, as we found in another investigation, ex-Soviet military officers who have reactivated their old networks. So they're doing remote-controlled operations now more readily. And you can understand why, for instance, they wouldn't want a device like this to kind of be let loose into the wild. This is not something they're going to hire some 18-year-old Latvian kid to do. And to Mark's point about the device that was acquired by DHS and is now on a U.S. military facility and being tested for a year, it's important to recognize we euphemistically dressed this up as it was acquired on the Russian black market. No, it was acquired by GRU officers who are corrupt, who wanted to make millions of dollars. Go figure. The guts of the thing, the software is Russian, and that's very key. This is a signature. It does all of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, were said that it couldn't do. So one of the things we heard is, the battery for this thing, if it existed, would be the size of a sanitation truck. No. Not only that, but it doesn't give off a lot of radiation. So unlike a microwave oven, which gets hot, it doesn't get hot. It runs quietly. It can be adjusted. It can bypass window pane and drywall. And it is pulse microwave radiation. So if, this is, by the way, this is open source. It's available to everyone. The IC had an expert panel convened to look into plausible explanations for AHI. One of the co-chairs of that panel, Dr. David Relman, who's a big advocate for all the victims here, hypothesized that pulse microwave radiation could lead to all of the symptoms. I mean, you mentioned the deterioration of the bones in the inner ear. One of the victims we interviewed for our first investigation, who was the wife of an FBI agent, the one in Tbilisi, she has something called Meniere's disease, which is literally the degradation of the tiny bones. She's had innumerable surgeries. This is a very rare condition, and we've interviewed other people who have it. So what are the chances of that? I mean, I don't think even the Russians have studied the full physiological effects of the weapon that they created. So I'm 100% with you. And again, the medical evidence here is pretty unassailable. I come back to biomarkers. Cannot be faked. People can't invent that or fantasize about having proteins in their bloodstream. But we have evidence of several of the Cornerstone victims had their blood taken both before and after, and they had the biomarkers. And their family members have it too.
I'll very briefly endorse Michael's explanation of why we're seeing less of that. The number of people that were involved with this program, based on all of our analysis, that include the muscle, the people traveling around the world who have some medical training, by the way, military medical training, and that includes the scientists. Both of these cohorts are now busy with the war in Ukraine. And the same scientists who worked on this are now working on jamming devices for drones, because that's a much, much higher priority for the Russian military, for the GRU. And they cannot do this at the same time. The same thugs or medically trained thugs, such as one of the guys in Salisbury, are now training foreigners to conduct low-level sabotage in Europe. And therefore, as Michael said, they cannot personally be involved. So for a while, we're lucky to not see an escalation or continuation of this program. How long that will last, we don't know.
So I think we're getting tight on time. No, go ahead.
So I was going to suggest, why don't we have the folks each come up to the microphone and in 30 seconds or less kind of successively ask your question, and then you guys can try to address all those questions, and then we can try to wrap it up in the next few minutes. But this has been great.
All right, so one after the other, ask your questions, then we'll answer it all together.
Okay. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Thank you, sir, for speaking out about this. Really sorry. I'm an American citizen, obviously outraged. What do you think is an appropriate and proportional response to this? This is never discussed. I would like to hear that.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Yeah, and Tom Rogan, Washington Examiner, obviously done some work on this, or not as auspiciously as the gentleman on the stage. One of the things that I think is quite compelling here, maybe for the Russians who are watching as well, is the degree to which some of the targeting has been extremely exquisite on Americans. What does that say about the counterintelligence side of things, if anything?
Ooh, good question.
Yes, hi. Mr. Weiss, I wanted to really thank you and commend you and Mr. Mark. Sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, but I am an attorney advocating for civilian victims of Havana syndrome. 5 of them diagnosed by Dr. Michael Hoffer, that I assume you know because he's the one that has been diagnosing federal employees, and he has been prohibited from continuing to diagnose civilian victims. And I just wanted to know why, if you are looking forward in the future to investigating, because Dr. James Giordano admitted to Ms. Catherine Headrich that these directed energy weapons attacks are happening in America. So that's my question. If you're going to be looking into these civilian victims that are not related, it's not like the baby related to the parent working for the federal government. Thank you.
What are crop circles all about?
What?
Crop circles. Okay.
If you guys know.
Yeah.
All right.
On the CI point, this is very interesting because it has come up repeatedly. How do the Russians know who to target? Obviously, people who served in, say, Kiev Station wouldn't be so indecipherable to the Russians, given their penetration at the time, 2014, 2015 in particular. I mean, the SBU was just Swiss cheese with Russian intelligence assets. There are some cases, though, where there are people who have served in sort of in the shadows of the shadows at CIA, doing things to countermand Russian malign activity that Russians should have no awareness of their identities or what they were up to, and somehow they did. One case in particular, which happened well overseas and not in an area that the Soviets ever used to control, a very significant cornerstone case comes to mind. So I don't know. Have they managed to penetrate, our databases? Have they recruited people? I don't know. One of the things that was discussed earlier today, in fact, was I think Dr. Relman had sort of offered up, like, what would it take for the Russians to hack the National Institute of Health and to pull all of the medical data of the victims? And the answer is not very much at all. And they have form doing this. After the Salisbury poisonings, after the Duma chemical weapons attack in Syria, they sent one of their cyber operating teams to The Hague to penetrate the OPCW, to exfiltrate all of that data so that they could basically get their retaliation in first, craft a narrative to deny responsibility. I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't pretend to have the answers.
Where's Tom?
Tom, yeah. Oh, there he is.
So just one shout out to you for all your reporting on this as well. I apologize, I didn't see you in the audience. So, I mean, Tom Rogan from the Washington Examiner has been phenomenal on this, particularly talking about some of the machinations at DOD, which have been really kind of underhanded. And while we had thought for some time that the Department of Defense would be an incredible ally, there's some things that have happened recently in changing personnel that have been quite alarming, and you've reported on that. So thanks. The reason why I wanted to address this is to even go even farther than Michael. We talk about this all the time. There is a counterintelligence issue here. The Cornerstone cases all have a Russian. Every officer in a Cornerstone case has been involved in going against the Russians. Absolutely. Some of them, as Michael noted, were doing things that the Russians shouldn't know that they were doing. But that does suggest that there's a CI problem at the agency. Now, is that the Russians gaining access to our travel? Certainly plausible. Or is it something more nefarious, an asset working in the intelligence community? And to raise that is not something preposterous because we've had that issue in the past. But the idea that they have been able to hit people involved in Russian operations with certainly a knowledge of kind of time and place, exactly when these individuals are going to go. This would take 29155 would have to deploy and set up, obviously do incredible amounts of counter surveillance in the prior to an operational act. They probably know things, and so I think that CI issue is very serious.
And to the question of what we should do to respond to this, that's a great question.
Oh, yeah.
Because we often,
I'd love to answer that one.
These things happen because we often don't respond to previous things. I think, personally, the most important thing we could do to strike back is to support Ukraine as much as we can at this time, because that hurts Putin himself.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons maybe that the agency has decided to paper over this, retroactively is the way they see it. They have provided targeting packages to the Ukrainians, and we have killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians, right? So we've got our retaliation and belatedly. I will say one thing, though, and again, this is, I guess, more for the DO folks here. I'll give you an example. Europe is having this conversation quite a lot because you notice all of these sabotage operations are taking place on European soil. Railways getting blown up or almost blown up in Poland, people being recruited, particularly Ukrainians looking for quick and easy money so that the Russians can blame the Ukrainians for doing it when in fact they're working for the GRU. Some of the European services have now not begun to start talking about retaliation, but have begun to retaliate. I'll give you one example. We reported on a story in Estonia that the interior minister of Estonia's car got smashed in by vandals. This was an old organized crime network in Estonia going back to the 90s that the GRU simply reactivated and paid, pennies on the dollar, basically, go around and do vandalism and graffiti and, chivvy and harass members of the Estonian government. Well, one day, the GRU officer who commissioned that operation came out of his apartment in Moscow and discovered that his car had been vandalized in Moscow. I think that's a very powerful message to send back. We'll do to you that which you do to us, right? And in fact, we should escalate. I would love to see, I'm saying this very openly, I would love to see some members of 29155 succumb to the same symptoms that they have afflicted on Americans. And I would love to see it happen inside Russian territory. And by the way, it doesn't have to be the Americans doing it. I can give you a list the size of my arm of Ukrainians who would line up to do stuff like that.
The only thing I can say is that they are working on that already.
I know that they're working, but I'm just, I'm encouraging of that effort. I think.
Thank everybody. On the crop circles, I don't know. CI is a. So
let me just jump in with one question from YouTube, and I know we're running long, and you've all been great, and we're running long because the questions have been great. But from the YouTube audience, somebody did ask, what can they do to help the victims of AHI?
I think, again, it's everything, all the success we've had in pushing this issue has been in the media. Not just, so it's just journalists reporting on this, but it's also, of course, again, not open source investigations, the amazing things you do. Commercially sourced, CSINT, I don't know, whatever it is, but the bottom. Citizen intelligence. Yeah. But the other part too is pressure on the administration, pressure on Congress. I keep mentioning Marco Rubio. We're trying to find allies within in the Hill and in the administration who would help on this, because it's just this issue is so. To me, it's so obvious the next steps would have to be done. So I don't write an op-ed, talk to your congressman, or certainly if you have any access to members of the administration. This is like just a layup. I just don't understand why they're not taking action on it.
All right. Wonderful session. Thank you very much to our guests, Christa Grozev, Michael Weiss, Mark Palomaropoulos. For those of you interested in staying for some food and drinks, it's out in the plaza. I would ask that you actually leave through the auditorium doors, go back into the lobby, and go out through the lobby doors. These doors here, you'll go out, and the reception area is roped off. You'll be on the outside of the roped off area, so go back into the foyer and loop around. Please exit and give our guests a chance to get their microphones off. They will come and join you at the reception. Don't stop them at the stage. And with that, thanks a lot, everybody. May 5th is our next event. Hope to see you there.
And what was your conclusion? Well,
you heard the sad news today,
yeah,
Bruce?
Okay.